Okay, so just wanted to start off with a little introduction of Adam, and then I'll hand it over to him to give his presentation. So Adam Bosch is the president and CEO of Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress, which is a policy, planning, and research organization, focuses on regional planning, researching on many issues, including housing, revitalization, infrastructure, transportation. Adam began his career in journalism. He worked as a reporter and an editor at a number of newspapers and magazines, including New York Times, Scientific America, and more. He left journalism and joined Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress in 2012 as vice president of research and external affairs. He has for 9 years served as a director of public and intergovernmental affairs for New York City Water Supply System, which is the largest municipal water supply in the United States. And he currently serves on the Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council and the Catskill Advisory Group. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Adam Bosch. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining us digitally to hear about the regional study that we did on electric charging stations. And before I share the study and go through it with you, I want to just talk a little bit about why the heck we decided to do this thing. It's sort of it's a timely topic, but why did we choose this? Well, we chose it, like all good pieces of research, for two reasons. One, because it was timely, and two, because someone had personal experience with it, and that personal experience is me. So when I drive down, I live in Saugerties, I live in Ulster County, and I find myself quite often driving down to Westchester County for business meetings. I have an electric car. And on my way back, I often have to charge up, especially in the winter, to get home. And I found myself doing one of two things, either trying to stop at like the Plattekill rest stop on the thruway where there's only one fast charging plug. And if someone got to it before me, it meant that I had to plan on being there for an hour. That was not terribly good. Or I could go over to the Walmart in New Windsor and plug in there and sit there for 20 minutes and watch seagulls eat garbage in the parking lot. And that wasn't a terribly good scenario either. So it sort of underscored for me that, as the rate of EV adoption rises, so does the availability of the infrastructure needs to rise with it. And I thought it was really interesting for a regional planning organization like ours to look into that. The second reason is that we know that there's a significant focus of government resources on this infrastructure in the years ahead. In fact, in the next few years, including some now, there's going to be more than $3 billion in federal, state, and utility funding that's available to the region to compete for. And the question is, if we are competitive for it, do we know where this infrastructure belongs? Do we know where it doesn't belong? Do we know the strategy behind the different places we could and should put it? And so part of the reason behind this report was really to say to the region, okay, we're getting ready to change the way we power our transport in the biggest way since we moved from the horse to the car. And that's not hyperbole. It's this big of a change. And we need to get very smart on where this new infrastructure belongs, because it's just different than the way we spatially had gas stations across the region. So I'm going to now share my screen and go through with you the report that we did. I dropped in the chat a link to our website where you can see the full study. This is a presentation version of it. It's interactive, so I hope people will enjoy some of the mapping. You can zoom in and see where charging stations are across the region. So I'm going to hop right into this. So right now, of course, we want to understand the foundational information of where we are now in the region in terms of EV adoption and EV charging. There are more than 70,000 fully electric cars on the road in New York State right now. And as you can see, the rate of original registrations for electric vehicles is rising pretty quickly. Only 5 years ago, it was 1 out of every 100 cars. Now we're pretty close to 1 out of every 18, 1 out of every 17 is where we are right now. So the rate of adoption is rising quite quickly. You can see here, probably by now, about 16,000 fully electric vehicles on the road in the Hudson Valley, about 17,000 in New York City, a little more than 20,000 on Long Island. We also took a look at the bordering states, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. You can see they're having a similar uptick in adoption. And the reason we need to care about the regions around us when it comes to charging infrastructure is so many people from these regions travel either to our region for tourism purposes, or they travel through our region on their way to get somewhere else. And so whether they're traveling to our region or through our region, there is the real need to make sure that we have adequate charging infrastructure available as more and more people are going electric for their vehicles. So 82,000 people in the bordering states, with fully electric vehicles. We just took a look at projections where we think this is going to go just for EVs on the road in the Hudson Valley, our neighbors who own EVs. And right before the pandemic, we were seeing an exponential type curve to the trend in terms of ownership and registration. So we did a linear trend. We did a little bit of an exponential trend. We think it's likely to land somewhere within this range, so that by 3 years from now, we will have essentially doubled or almost tripled what's on the road now. So, this is coming at us quick. And why is it coming at us quick? Well, it's a combination of state and federal policy and car manufacturer goals that they've set for themselves. So as you go through this, everything that's in gold is a state or federal government policy that is pushing us toward EV adoption in a greater way or a quicker way. And the ones in purple are car manufacturer goals. I'm not going to go through all of these, but what I am going to point out is that there's some major goals that hit early and in the mid 2030s, including a goal in New York State that all cars and trucks essentially be zero emission in 2035, all new sales of cars and trucks. Along with that, you have the car dealerships pledging in some cases to go all electric or 75% electric by those times. So this is just to say it's a combination of government policy and car manufacturer policy that is really pushing us in this direction toward fueling our transport with electricity instead of with combustion engines. This is just to say there's a lot of funding out there, and I'm going to go through this in a more granular way in a minute. But the utilities, the New York State utilities have required to make $701 million available, not for the installation of the charging stations themselves, but for the installation of all the electric infrastructure that's necessary to get the power to the place where you're going to install the charging station. I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about the NEVI program. This is a program that comes out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That includes $175 million just for New York to build out charging stations along its highway corridors. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And there's a whole host of tax credits also available for charging that communities and businesses and others have access to. In addition to this, one of the things that's not listed explicitly here, but it's in our bigger report, is the federal government also set aside $2.5 billion to increase, to fund the installation of charging stations across the country. That money is not directly tied to the NEVI program. So all of this is to say, there is a huge amount of money right now in the funding ecosystem to install charging stations across the region. And the question for us was, well, how the heck do we determine where these things belong? And equally important, how do we determine also where these things don't belong? Because they don't belong everywhere. So here's a quick look at the charging stations that we do have across the region. This is all the charging stations. I'm going to talk a little bit in charging lingo now. So we have about 400 charging stations across the region. And again, this is interactive. So if you click on this study later in the day, you can zoom in. Of course, I'm sitting here at Ulster County. We can click on some of these stations. It'll show you where the station is, what kind of plugs, how many plugs. So feel free to poke around this map. It's fun to play with. We have 400 charging stations in the region. Of those, public charging stations, I should say, of those, about 350 are level 2 chargers. What does that mean? Well, a level 2 charger is the equivalent draw it's a dryer plug. It's a 240 service. So a level 2 charger will charge that car to travel 25 additional miles for every hour of charge. That's good if you're at home. That's good if you're staying at a hotel. That's good if you're staying at a tourism destination where you are going to be there all day. But if you are traveling to the region or through the region on a day trip, level 2 chargers are utterly useless for you. They are very, very important for at-home charging, at hotel charging, at places where you're going to spend an entire day. But they're not helpful if you need to charge quickly and keep going somewhere. This is just a 20-minute drive time analysis of the region, of all the parts of the region that are within 20-minute drive time of some charger. You'll see here really the only place that's not within a 20-minute drive time of some kind of charger is the heart of the Catskill Park and a little bit of the Delaware Valley in the western part of Sullivan County. But otherwise, most of the region is within a 20-minute drive of some kind of charger. These are the level 2 chargers only. I already talked about what those are. And then we really wanted to take a look at the level 3 chargers. You'll hear them sometimes referred to as DCFCs. That's short for direct current fast chargers. These are the chargers that, generally speaking, can charge about 80% of your battery in, say, 15 to 30 minutes, depending on your car and depending on the power of the charger. These chargers are the ones that a lot of the funds are focusing on, because these are the chargers that really allow people to get around. This is the charger I need that if I'm going down to White Plains on a business trip and I got to get home by dinner time, I got to stop and charge for 5, 10, 15 minutes so that I can get back to Saugerties, right? This is, I had to drive out to Boston to visit my family last year. This is the charger I needed to stop somewhere and charge for 15 minutes so I could make it the other half of my trip, right? So these are very, very important part of the build out to make sure that people have confidence in the charging infrastructure, that we're reducing charging anxiety, and that people can really get around. What you see on this map is that most of our direct current fast chargers are in the southern part of our region or largely concentrated along the thruway corridor, okay? And you'll see as we go to there's relatively few of them, and they're really important. As we go to a 20-minute drive time analysis on the fast chargers, you can see now there's a more significant part of our region is not within 20 minutes drive of a fast charger. And that includes like some pretty significant population centers like Port Jervis. Port Jervis, the city of Port Jervis is not within a 20-minute drive of a direct current fast charger. So this is a place where we really need to focus some investment and some planning and some smart action to make sure that people can get to and through and around our region without a long wait and a hassle. I'm going to zip through this part because it's not super important, but the existing locations of those direct current fast chargers, a lot of them, about a quarter of them are at car dealerships. And we really talked, internally about whether to even include those, because unless you bought your car at that dealership or your car is that brand, it's not the case that all car dealerships let you just pull up and use their fast charger. In fact, they generally have cars hooked up to them that they're either trying to sell or they've just repaired. So about a quarter of those fast chargers they're sort of available, but not really available. And then most of them are at markets and shopping plazas. Some of them are in municipal parking lots, but this is sort of the outlay of the types of places where those chargers are now. There's a good trustworthy international group that takes a look at what the charging ratio should be. So as we see the adoption of electric vehicles increase, how many chargers should we have out in the public domain? And the International Energy Association recommends a charger for every 10 electric vehicles that's owned within a region. You can see across the Hudson Valley, we're at different, ratios. And I'll just explain that we're at different ratios for different reasons. So you can see Ulster County is below that ratio. That's because Ulster County has been pretty aggressive compared to other counties about getting charging stations out there early on. Westchester County has also been very aggressive about getting charging stations out there. But guess what? They've also had a higher degree of electric vehicle adoption. So their ratio shows they need more charging stations, not because they haven't done the work, they have, but their folks have actually just purchased more electric vehicles than the other counties that surround them. Putnam County, I mean this with peace and love, right? They're just behind the curve a little bit on getting charging installed in their county. I think it's a similar story for Orange and Rockland to some degree. So, and then, a county like Greene County doesn't have a single direct current fast charger in the whole county. So, there's different, I guess, uptake rates in terms of the infrastructure that we need in the different parts of the region. But everyone just needs to get smart about what this means because the planning horizon is pretty short here for some of the targets. I'm not going to go through this part. I will allow everyone on the call to go through this at their leisure. What we did want to do is go county by county. Every county's needs are unique. Every county's highway system is unique. But we did go county by county and try to render some specific advice based on the number of chargers and the geographic outlay of those chargers in each county now. So a county like Orange County, for instance, they're, as I mentioned, a little behind the curve, but a huge opportunity there in the sense that many of their small cities sit right on the highways. And so there's an opportunity there to install charging, say in municipal lots. I'll talk about this in a minute. You have them in the municipal lots, then while people are charging for 15, 20 minutes, they can actually patronize the local businesses that are downtown. City of Middletown has done a good job of that as an example. You go to the city of Middletown, you plug in, you look up, and you're staring not only right at their signature brewery, but at the street that has 10 to 15 mom and pop shops and restaurants. So, it's a good strategy. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. So looking forward, what do we need to be prepared for? The first thing we need to be prepared for and that we need to understand is the way this federal money is going to go toward the build out of our highway corridors. Right now, our highway corridors are sort of ailing for additional fast charging. I mentioned, if I go to one of the thruway rest stops, generally speaking, they have one plug. That creates what's called a queuing issue, where if I go in to plug my car in and someone's there before me, or two people are there before me, I have to wait for that first person to charge and that second person to charge before I can plug in to charge. And that's not instantaneous, so you could be there for a while. So we really need to focus investment and attention on building out our highway corridors. That's what the NEVI program, the federal NEVI program, is meant to do. We're going to get $175 million in New York. The rules are that that program has to guarantee at least 4 fast charging plugs that are spread by no more than 50 miles on designated highway corridors. New York State has been doing some of that work already through the New York State Power Authority and its Evolve New York program. So the state expects that it's going to need about 30 million of that 175 million to complete the full highway build out. There is still some question about what's going to happen with the remaining 145 million. My expectation is the state will either administer that through NYPA or eventually trickle that money down to communities through some either competitive process or formula process. For us, right, at the local level, we need to start thinking about what we would do with that money if and when it trickles down to us, in addition to some of the monies that are available to us now. As I mentioned, New York is also eligible for a portion of $2.5 billion in funding that was dedicated to EV charging in one of the new federal bipartisan bills. So here you can see these are the highway corridors in New York State that were designated by the NEVI program for the build out. I think a lot of these are pretty intuitive. You can then see what they are in our region. So obviously you've got the Thruway, you've got 17 or 86, whatever you want to call it today. You've got 84, and then you have some of the roads, some stretches of 95 and other highways as you get closer to New York City. These are going to be the highway corridors that are the focus of the state's attention and investment through that NEVI program. So you'll be seeing some build out there. Of course, there's also state funds going into building out the EV charging network in New York. The New York State joint utilities were required to set aside a few, it's about $700 million. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But NYPA, through its Evolve New York program, dedicated $250 million to install, I think it's 800 fast charging plugs across the state. So some places where they've been installed in this region include LaGrange at the, I think it's a Stop and Shop in LaGrange. The ones in the city of Middletown were installed through that program. And they're looking for areas that are right off the highway corridors that are helping people who are traveling, again, to and through the region. And they're trying to support the goal of having 850,000 zero emission vehicles on the road by 2025 by making sure there's adequate charging for those vehicles to move around. The utility money, as I mentioned, $701 million, that's going toward multi-unit dwellings or non-residential locations. So a combination of businesses, apartment buildings, places like that. This program does not fund the charging stations themselves, but what the utilities, so Central Hudson, Orange and Rockland, NYSEG, Con Edison, what they're funding is actually bringing the electric to the site where you want to install the charging stations, because as you'll see in a minute, the quantity of electrons, the volume of electricity that you have to bring to these sites is gigantic. And that means that you have to install bigger transformers, larger capacity wires. Sometimes they have to increase the size of a substation by adding another bank on a substation, different circuitry. There's actually a lot that has to go on in the background, work by the electric utilities to get the electric, an ample quantity of electric to these sites. There's different levels of reimbursement. Anyone out there now can apply for this money. As you'll see, most of our utilities have a significant amount of their allocation remaining. Only Con Edison right now is overextended in terms of they've committed more money than they have to projects, so they're fully committed. But when we wrote this study in the fall, Central Hudson, NYSEG, and Orange and Rockland all had around 90% of their funds remaining. So that's a really important source of money that we should be tapping into. The reimbursement rates differ depending on where you are, but for disadvantaged communities, you can actually click on this link in our study and it'll bring you to a map of what's called disadvantaged communities that's based on a combination of environmental and income factors. They're eligible for up for 100% reimbursement for all the electric work through this process. So we are really encouraging those communities to take advantage of that to get these installed. Now, I think one of the pieces of this that is really underappreciated and misunderstood is the amount of work that has to be done by the electric utilities to install these electric chargers across the region. Let's start with a simple fact. One bank of direct current fast chargers is the same draw on the grid as a 1,000 unit apartment building. So every time you see a bank of fast chargers, you are looking at a small skyscraper. The problem is when someone builds a building that large, the electric utilities get a lot of lead time, right? So that building is going through a planning process. It's got to go through a planning board review. It has to go through a construction and permitting phase. And you're talking about, probably somewhere between 1 to 3 to 4 years. And they have that much time to bring that quantity of electrons, that volume of electricity to the site of that building. While the electric utilities have some people calling them up and saying, hey, I'd like to install some direct current fast chargers next month. Like, can you help me make that happen? And the answer is no, they can't do it that quick. A lot of times they have to go do an engineering analysis of their infrastructure in the grid that exists in that area. They have to look at their capacity maps to understand, do they have the capacity to deliver that volume without major upgrades? If they have to make major upgrades, they actually have to then go put in the orders for the equipment and then actually install it. That could take a really long time, especially given some of the supply chain disruptions we've seen. I know some of the utilities, it was taking them as long as a year to get transformers that they ordered. So there's a real challenge here, and we have to have some understanding in what it takes to work with the electric utilities and the big sort of job this is for the utilities. So we actually went through, and I just want to mention, for the electric utilities, it's important to understand where we're going. In order to fight climate change, we are going down the path of trying to electrify as many things as possible, right? We want to get off fossil fuels, which makes total sense. It's important to understand that if you, up till now, electric utilities have really been responsible for two things. One is general household and business electric, and the second is cooling. But under the scenario that we're going down, they're going to become responsible for heating through heat pumps and other mechanisms, and for fueling an increased amount of our transportation through electric vehicles. That's a hugely bigger responsibility for the electric utilities, and you can see this fact right here. This is absolutely true. We fact checked this a whole bunch of times. A home that switches to a heat pump and 2 electric vehicles triples its draw on the grid. So I will repeat that. A home that switches to a heat pump and 2 electric vehicles will triple its draw of electricity from the grid. So now you can understand that in some of these places throughout the region, the grid infrastructure that exists will need to be significantly upgraded, made larger to allow that sort of draw from the grid, to allow that quantity of electrons to be wheeled around. So we put together a guide for working with the electric utilities. Who do you reach out to? What do you tell them you're doing? What are the steps they then have to take to make it actually happen for you? How long do those things take? All of that is in our guide to working with the utility companies. And one of the things that you can do right away, if you're looking to install some electric charging infrastructure, some charging stations, you can get a pretty good sense of how long it's going to take by going and looking at the individual utility capacity maps. These are maps where you can actually zoom in on different neighborhoods in your town or in your county and see what the capacity of the current infrastructure is to allow the installation of more things that demand electricity. Most of them are a simple red, yellow, green system. So if you see that the distribution lines in your region are green, that means that there is sufficient capacity to add more things on that part of the grid. And that means that if you wanted to install some charging stations in the near term, your chances are pretty good that you could do that relatively quick. If you're yellow, it's sort of 50-50. And if you're red, it means that essentially the electric grid infrastructure in your neck of the woods is kind of at its maximum capacity or near its maximum capacity, and that there would probably need to be some pretty significant upgrades to allow it to, as I say, wheel more electrons around and allow the installation of something like electric vehicle charging stations. So that's a helpful thing that folks can access. I'm going to talk real quick about the finances. Right now, charging stations financially do not make sense. They cost anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million to install a bank of direct current fast chargers. And the reality is right now, the best of them, and what I mean by the best is the ones that are busiest, where there's people plugging into them all day, only break even over the life of the equipment. And so this creates a chicken and the egg dilemma for us, right? We know that we cannot encourage the adoption of electric vehicles without adequate charging out there, but we also can't pay for the charging equipment unless there's a large enough number of electric vehicles to actually use the chargers. So our government in the state and in the country has made a decision that we need to actually pay in the short term to subsidize the charging stations because we can't go through this transition to electric vehicles without the charging stations being out there. So in the near term, charging stations, generally speaking, are a money loser. But those economics are going to get better and better as the technology gets better and as the rate of electric vehicle adoption goes up. I told my wife the other night, you may remember in the early 2000s, if you wanted to buy a flat screen TV, it was like $6,000 or $3,000, and now you can get one for $200. I mean, similar thing happens with all technologies. The cost and the price and the economics will get better as time goes by, but that's where we are now. We put a whole best practices and policies guide together. I'm not going to go through all of these with you, but we did want to render some recommendations on where these charging stations belong. And as I said, also where they do not belong. I think the reflex of governments when charging stations first came out, let's say 6-7 years ago, was to put them in the places where it was easiest to put them. And that generally meant on public property. Some of those were good installations. So at some parks where you have all day baseball or softball tournaments, great. Other places, they made sense. At our libraries, at our senior centers, I'm just going to be honest, having a level 2 charger at those places is utterly useless. And I think we know that better now. So where do we put them as we're doing this build out? Where do we want to think about putting them? Well, we've talked about the highway corridors. Highway corridors extremely important. We want to make sure people can get to and through the region. Hospitals, important for a couple reasons. One, you never know when you have to go to a hospital and how much battery you might have left if you're at the hospital. So you want to make sure there's some charging there. But also places like hospitals and police stations and areas near substations, they tend to stay electrified even when the power goes out because there's more redundancy running to them. So it's a good place to have some charging. Main streets, this is for residential purposes. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but one of the big challenges we have is that the vast majority of charging happens at home. So me, I have an electric vehicle. I do 98% of my charging in my garage with a little level 2 charger that I installed. Again, it's just a dryer plug. Had my electrician come install a dryer plug in my garage. I do 98% of my charging at home. The question becomes, what happens if you live in a multifamily dwelling? What if you live in an apartment building? What if you live over top of storefronts on one of our main streets? What if you don't have control over your electric panel and you can't just go install a new 240 service? So main streets are a place where we need to think about having some level 2 charging so that people who live on our main streets will be able to charge. That also goes for apartment buildings, townhouses, places where people are renting. We really need to think about how they are going to have the accessibility to the charging that they need to power their vehicles. So multifamily housing, I just mentioned. Municipal parking lots near locally owned businesses. We think there's a strong case here to have some number of level 3 chargers in municipal parking lots that are near our business districts. I mentioned the city of Middletown where they have them right there where all the restaurants and breweries are. Yonkers is another example. They have a plaza in Yonkers that's not filled with national chains, but it's filled with local businesses, and they installed fast charging in the plaza that has a lot of local restaurants and other local businesses in it. The reality is that as we build this out, we have a choice to make. And again, I'll use my personal story. Am I going to stop in Newburgh and charge up at Walmart and watch seagulls eat garbage for 20 minutes? Or am I going to stop in Newburgh and charge up in the municipal lot and go to a locally owned business for 20 minutes and have a cup of coffee or a sandwich? You know, this is an opportunity that we have to think about. And I think we need to utilize the charging station strategically to make sure that we're funneling folks into our downtowns and not leaving them stranded out on the highway or at some big box store in an endless looking parking lot. I mentioned substations, police facilities, places that stay electrified. In some cases, especially parks where folks are going to spend a full day, it does make sense to have some level 2 chargers there, because if folks are going to spend, 3, 4, 5 hours there, they can get a decent charge with a level 2 charger, and that may allow them to come to our parks and then get back home. Private parking lots that include businesses, tourism attractions, very important one. We are right in that cone of distance where folks who come up here from Long Island, from New York City, from New Jersey, to go to our tourism destinations, to go to our agritourism destinations, our orchards, places like that, they need to charge before they go home. So especially some of our larger tourism destinations, our resorts, places like that, it's really in their best interest to have some chargers. They could be level 2, they could be level 3, depending on the visitation patterns. But we're going to have to start thinking about that and getting those installed so that people can have the confidence in coming there and coming and going. Couple real quick best practices, not only best practices, but policy recommendations I want to share. Again, I'm not going to go through all these in the interest of time, but it's really important for people to create a business case for charging. As I said, these don't belong everywhere. They belong strategically placed, especially given the stress that they put on the grid and the grid infrastructure. Every time we install one of these, some portion of our electric utility fees are going toward them. So we better make sure we're putting them in places where they're useful. It's important for communities to think about who's going to stop here. How long are they going to stay here, right? Why are they stopping here? What's there to do while they spend 15 or 20 minutes here? And essentially begin to develop a use case for why it makes sense to have charging in one place or another. And as you do that, you may actually convince yourself that it doesn't make sense to have it there. That's good. You may convince yourself that it doesn't make sense to have a level 3 there, but it makes sense to have a level 2 or vice versa. But we need to start making a business case or a use case for where we're putting these. We also need to future-proof the installations that we're doing. It's great to go out and install 4 direct current fast charging plugs now, but the reality is that in 2 years, that bank of 4 chargers may need to be more like 6 or 8 because of the rate of adoption going up and up and up. So when we have the ground open, when we're installing new parking lots, let's make sure we're installing enough of the concrete platforms and the ducts and the electrical duct banks and other things to increase the size of that seamlessly without opening everything back up again and disturbing, what we already installed. I think hiring a licensed electrician probably goes without saying, but you'd be surprised at things you see sometimes. Let's make sure we hire a licensed electrician. Down in Westchester County, the IDA is supporting this in Westchester County. They have a rule that essentially says if you're building a new parking structure or certain sorts of developments, you do have to include electric vehicle charging or electric vehicle charging infrastructure. This is increasingly sensible. So they're doing it down in Westchester County. I think it's a good best practice for us to adopt elsewhere. I mentioned being EV ready before you pave. If you're paving a parking lot, before you put down that asphalt, think about whether you should have some electric run for charging in the future. Charging fees and transparency. I'm just going to talk about standardization in general. Right now, there's really 2 systems. There's the Tesla system and there's the everybody else system. But there's also about 8 or 10 different, systems for paying for the charging. So there's apps, there's credit cards, there's all sorts of wacky things. We need to move towards standardization. Imagine if you needed a new toaster, you went to Target and you weren't sure you'd be able to plug it in when you got home. It's not sensible. We need to begin moving towards some degree of standardization, both in terms of the plugs and in terms of how we pay to fuel those cars up. Maintenance and coverage, we need to get to a point where there's some good maintenance policies or requirements to make sure that these systems don't go down, so that when people drive up to them with only 20 miles of travel left on their car, they don't drive up and find a broken station or one that's out of service. That's really important. We think we were asked as part of this project, we were asked by some of the counties to draft a zoning code that would require electric vehicle charging stations at new multifamily dwellings. Again, this is very sensible given the fact that those folks are not going to have control over their electrical systems. So if you click here, we took the best of the zoning ordinances from, I believe it was New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, and California, and turned them into a Frankenstein's monster of a zoning code. We had that reviewed by experienced municipal lawyers on our board of directors, and it's something that any community could go and adopt now to make sure there is a consistent rule and a consistent application of that rule for how electric vehicle charging should be installed at future multifamily dwellings. I'm going to stop after this one so that we can answer some questions. I mentioned the NEVI money. There is federal money that's going to build out the highway corridors. There's only one problem. There is a provision in the United States Federal Code 23, section 1, subsection 111, that currently prohibits commercial activities on highways and highway infrastructure built after 1960 with federal funds. Well, what does that mean? It means that currently all of our park and rides, all of our pull-off areas, and some of our rest stops, you are not currently allowed by federal code to install electric vehicle charging at those locations. There's only two carve-outs from that provision of federal code. Both of them have to do with human vices. One is for soda vending machines, and the other one is for a lottery scratch-off ticket vending machines. So I think if we could create a carve-out for soda and for lotto tickets, we should make a carve-out for electric charging. When you take these places off the map, you end up taking off the map a lot of places that are really, really sensible to install electric charging along the highway corridors. I spoke with Senator Schumer's office about this last week. I was pretty shocked to learn that really nobody had brought this up with them before, but they checked into it, and it is the case. So we need to get this fixed. Otherwise, that federal money will not be applied perhaps as rationally and as strategically as it otherwise might. And then I'll end with this one, just the unanswered question of quantity. How many charging stations do we need now? If I install some at the local park and ride, if I was allowed to, if I installed 4 now, how do I know when that 4 needs to become 6 or when that 6 needs to become 8? Right now, the reality is we don't have any central system that monitors the use of the charging stations we have to understand which of them are being used to, stretch to their capacity, which of them are being underused, when we have queuing problems at some of them, so that we can say, hey, this one over here is being used every 5 minutes all day long between Thursday and Sunday. We probably need to go install another 2 units there. So we, again, need some centralization of the intelligence and the use patterns so that we can make informed decisions about this in the future. Last thing I'll leave you with is just looking into the future. Are we going to see this? I hope you can all see this. Maybe I'll make it bigger. Hold on. In the future, in the future, are we going to see a lot of this in our downtowns? This is someone running a level 2 charger from their house across the sidewalk to their car that's parked on the street. Are we going to see that? What do we do about it, right? We need to think about that. In Europe, they're playing in Germany and the United Kingdom, they're playing with changing the voltage that goes to their street lamps so that they can install some electric charging plugs and capabilities in their street lamps. Should we try that? Does it make sense? Where does it make sense? And then I'm going to play this video while I talk about it. In China, yeah, they have charging stations in China, but they don't fully rely on charging stations. They have automatic battery swapping stations for many of their cars because they have standardized the chassis, they've standardized the way the battery attaches to the chassis, and they've standardized the way the battery attaches to the drivetrain so that if your battery is empty, you can pull up into one of these automatic battery swap stations, get your empty battery automatically taken off the car, and have a new full battery attached to the car in under 4 minutes. So as I think it's a good question to ask, anytime we're going through something new, anytime we're changing something major in our civic society, it's important to just slow down and ask, are we doing this right? Is there a way to do it better? Is there a way to do it more efficiently? And so when we saw this video in the midst of our research, we thought it was worth sharing because we think it's just something worth thinking about. So I'm gonna end there. Big thanks to the folks who supported our research. The county governments were hugely supportive, including Ulster County government, and of course the local electric union as well. They they understand a lot of their folks are going to be working on projects to install these. They want to make sure it's done safely and according to code so that we don't have accidents and things like that. So I'm gonna scroll back up, and I'm going to also be quiet, and I'm going to stop sharing. And if anyone has questions, Chriso, I'm happy to take them.
That's great. Yeah, we still have
Bruce has his real hand up. Go ahead, Bruce.
still have about 10 minutes for a Q&A. So yeah, let's jump into it. I think people can unmute themselves if they want to. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, let's see. Unmute do you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
we hear you loud and clear.
Great. All right, so you mentioned there's two systems, of course, there's Tesla and everybody else. Tesla is now starting a program where they're opening up their chargers to everybody else. And we actually have one in Red Hook, I believe, a bank of those in Red Hook. Did you take that into account with all your numbers, or were you just going with the everybody else figures?
No, so all our mapping includes the Tesla stations as well. So when you look at our mapping and the numbers, it includes both the Tesla and the, I'll just say the non-Tesla. I always forget the CDH, whatever it's called. Yep, it includes them all.
One other question. I'm with the Conservation Advisory Council for the town of Shandaken, and we are actively looking at putting charging stations in Pine Hill and in Phoenicia. Because we're a pretty big tourist destination, and I believe that we might be eligible for the disadvantaged communities as well. I'd have to look into that. But my question was, we were saying that, well, we should put level 2 chargers in because we want to put these in the middle of our towns, our business sections, and want people to be able to spend time shopping and having dinner and so on and so forth. But now I'm beginning to think that perhaps we should be putting in level 3s after hearing your discussion. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so Bruce, I mean, level 2s would make sense at the Emerson, right? I mean, people are going to go there and spend a bunch of days, right?
Right.
Are people going to are people going to go to Brio's for 4 hours? I think that's the question you got to ask yourself, right? Is like, when people are in the heart of Phoenicia, say they're staying at a local lodging place nearby or an Airbnb or whatever they're up to, are they going to be there for 3, 4, 5 hours? Because remember, to get 100 miles of charge on your car, you're gonna have to be there for 4 hours.
Right. Correct.
So I think your question is the right one. I'm not going to pretend to know the answer, but I think you're thinking of it the right way.
So we should be seriously thinking evenly about level 3 and level 2. Then is your opinion?
I think so, and I think if I were a town like Shandaken, I'd be looking at like a town-wide strategy, because I mean, you've got Bel Air, you've got the Emerson, you've got your hamlets. I mean, you may be able to have the level 3s in a place that makes sense so that people can still come into Pine Hill and Phoenicia, but the level 3s are somewhere where the electric load exists already, so you don't have to spend a lot of money trying to run that elsewhere. Right. So I think look at your whole town and think about what the strategy should be. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, we're talking in costs for a level 3 charger. It's probably like $200,000 for a level 3 charger. That's through a company that actually installs them and does the turnkey operation. But so are these grants and are this money available? Will that take care of most of that? I mean, what?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest part of that cost is going to be running the electric to the site, and that's what the utility money is meant for. So you call, I mean, you're Central Hudson and Shandaken, right?
That's we're NYSEG.
Oh yeah. I knew there's some weird division when you head up that far west. So you call up NYSEG. I think NYSEG has more money left than the other 3. So call them up. We can get you the name of the person to call and.
And what I'm sorry to just keep asking questions, but what about the cost of the actual units themselves? Is that covered by any of these funds?
It might be covered by some of the federal funds, but I have to dig in that more with the lead researcher who did our report. I don't know exactly the answer to that. It does if you want to work with NYPA to install one of their 800, but if you're on your own, you might be a little more on your own for that piece of it.
That's a big nut. Okay, thank you so much.
We can get back to that.
Yeah.
I see, Jen, I see you have your hand up.
Did you say Jen?
Yeah, Jen, go ahead.
Hi, this is Jennifer O'Donnell, Stone Dock Golf Course. We actually are getting 4 chargers, but we signed up before some of the new legislation was passed. And so we got 90% of the infrastructure covered. And we're only doing level 2. Because we're a golf course and a cafe, we assume that it might be useful for some people as well as maybe our neighbors. So we're sticking with level 2, I think. But just to answer Bruce's question a little bit, Livingston Energy, who we worked with, was really gung-ho and competitive with ChargePoint. And I think that they're all these companies that are popping up are vying for the business, and they're willing to do the project management, and they're willing to find the incentive. And we did get it down to 6,000 from 50,000. So it's worth working with the companies, the suppliers, the installers to see how far they're going to take it with you. And I wanted to ask a question though, which is, would I be covered 100% now? And would there be other incentives for the actual charging stations now that all these new programs are in effect?
No, I don't. High Falls is not in one of the disadvantaged areas. I don't think so. That would still be the 90% that you got.
Okay, so $6,000 for 4 charging plugs is pretty good
I think that's pretty
before rebates.
good. I think that's good.
Okay,
Good job, Jen. You drive a hard bargain. Congratulations.
thanks.
All right, Vlad, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So I'm a recent graduate from Morgan State University, and I recognize that there's a need for charging stations, and I do recognize that there is going to be a growing need for them over the next couple of years. So my question is kind of multi-layered. The first is, what should I prioritize initially? Should it be to make sure that my credit's set so that I can take out a loan to purchase a level 3 charging station or a level 2 and 3 charging station for community colleges, for commuter students, or in other downtown areas? And 2, should I be prioritizing reaching out to my local legislation or my local representatives to understand where I can actually have charging stations set up? And what's the best course of action for someone like myself who's looking to create a business where I can focus on charging stations, understanding that the need is going to grow into the future, even if it doesn't reflect that today?
So Vlad, I think I understood your question. I'm not sure I could give you advice on if you're starting a business, what I would do. If I were starting a business today with all the money in the world, I think I'd probably try to invent the best battery ever invented. That's probably what my business I would start. But if you had to go to your community and advocate for something, I think what I would do is try to advocate to, as I was saying to Bruce, take a holistic look at my entire town or my entire city and understand where are the strategic locations in my community where these things belong and at what level. So that's going to be a different answer for every community. So the answer I gave Bruce about Shandaken is going to be totally different than the answer I'd give Tim Rogers about New Paltz or that I'd give Steve Noble about Kingston, because each place's use case is going to be different. So, at a place like New Paltz, you got college students to think about, or you have people coming into town to hike to think about. In Kingston, you have multifamily residences to think about. So the recommendation about making a use case and actually sitting down and creating a community plan for charging, I think is really an important tip. In fact, the city of New Rochelle down in Westchester County, after our study came out, they put out an RFP for a citywide charging plan for their city, because I think they understood they have a lot of multifamily dwellings, but they also sit in an area where people maybe coming through town or coming to town and leaving, where they needed some public charging too. So I think it's a good planning exercise just to sit down with your leaders, no matter where you are, and say, what are we doing about this? What should we do about this? And then get together with your environmental management council for your town or whomever, and start to stencil out a plan. I think is the best way to do it. Because again, the thing I want to harp on here is that the planning horizon is pretty short. I mean, if we're not allowed in New York to buy any more new internal combustion engines in 2035, that's like 11 years from now. That's pretty short planning horizon. So we really have to get on the giddy up in terms of figuring out where these things should go.
Let's just take one last question from Marcy.
Hi, everyone. So,
Marcy.
hi, Adam. I have a question for you. For folks that are trying to help out their municipalities and looking at their towns, are there any resources available for technical studies that you could recommend to help with that analysis?
I mean, for individual towns, I mean, other than just asking a consultant to help, I'm not aware. So there was actually, let me back up. There was a company called Energetics that did some work with NYSERDA, and they put together some, I don't want to call them stencils, but they're like guides. They're similar to our study, but our study's regional and theirs was a little more like, here are some things your town can do. But then it was good. I mean, Energetics did a good job. So if you look up, I think if you go on Energetics website, the work that they did for NYSERDA is linked on their website, or you could probably find on the NYSERDA website too. But absent of that, you're probably just either sitting down with smart people in your town to put some thought in it based on, the work that we just did is meant to give you sort of like the foundational knowledge to make some smart decisions, or just asking a firm to help you think about it and help get you into the programs.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering maybe if you had firm recommendations. I'm thinking about like all the people that are out there on like Climate Smart Task Force and stuff that are going to want to be looking at all of this. And if there's some technical.
I got too many friends and too many firms. I don't want to.
Okay. All right. Maybe Melissa, we could put together a list of who those firms might be and circulate them out to everybody.
I think I saw some of them on this call. Wink, wink.
Yeah,
no.
and we can also make sure our Clean Power Guide keeps getting updated with some tips.
Okay, cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you
Excellent.
so much. Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you everyone for showing up. And just so you know, we are going to send out a link to a recording of this and anything else that came up that seems valuable that people might want. We'll probably send out the slideshow, or in this case, maybe it was actually just from the website.
Sure.
But in any case, we'll make sure that you have links to all of it.
Yep. And I dropped my email address in the chat. Anyone wants to reach out and ask me a question, feel free. We're here to be a helpful resource to the region. So don't be bashful.
Yep, and we have Ugreen membership information in the chat. This is how you hear about these great things. And Chris O, not to put you on the spot, our next mixer is at Dixon Roadside in Woodstock on
the 16th. It's actually exactly 2 weeks from today. It's from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at Dixon in Woodstock.
Great.
And as a reminder, if you're planning on attending, bring somebody who hasn't attended a meeting before.
All right.
Thank you. Great presentation, Adam.
Thanks, everyone. Have a
Very
good
good.
one now. See ya.
Take care.